It is the week of Ohio State, Michigan, and Kyle Rowland from The Blade joins us. And Kyle, as we talk to the Ohio State players and coaches on Tuesday, a lot of conversation about the fact that none of the guys we talked to, none of the guys that were available to the media, were from Ohio. So there's almost this feeling out process of, well, what do you know about the rivalry?
Yeah, and that includes the head coach who's from New Hampshire. It is an interesting kind of factor you have these days with how national Ohio State's recruiting has gotten under Urban Meyer, and Ryan Day's continuing that. You get guys that did not grow up at all around this rivalry and didn't really understand it until they got to Ohio State. But the common theme from all of them was they quickly understood just how huge it was, how much of an impact it has on fans, basically for 365 days a year. And they are just completely indoctrinated into what this rivalry is as soon as they step on this campus.
Another one of the interesting schisms, if you will, when you talk about the game of this year, BCSN is celebrating its 15th anniversary. In those 15 years, Michigan has only beaten Ohio State once. There's a generation of fans who grew up in the 90s who shiver when you hear Shamango Biakabatuka, who hear Ty Streets and they start to drop things, that are still very much concerned about this Michigan team. Yet there's another group of fans, the younger fans, who all they have known is Ohio State dominating this series. And I think a lot of folks after last year's game really have the attitude of, you've got to see it to believe it when it comes to Michigan beating Ohio State.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating kind of subplot of the fan bases and their whole psychology of this game. Because even with Ohio State dominating so much lately, there are so many of them that still are just like, I don't know. And it's because of the 1990s. And now that has just been completely flipped to Michigan fans. I mean, it doesn't matter how good they are. A lot of them say, I won't believe Michigan can actually do it until they do win. And they just always fear that something bad is going to happen. It's almost like a Cleveland sports fan complex or whatever, where it's negativity no matter what. And I mean, ever since Jim Tressel walked into the Schottenstein Center and gave his 310-day speech, this rivalry just flipped, and it really hasn't been the same ever since.
And I think one of the things that is gnawing at the craw of some of those Ohio State fans that are concerned about this game is, well, Michigan's playing their best football of the season, and Ohio State didn't look spectacular against Rutgers. They played their worst game against Penn State, but let's put this into perspective. They played their worst game against Penn State, a top 10 team, and still won by double digits.
Yeah, a team that beat Michigan about a month ago. I think that result could be different today if they played again. But yeah, I mean, I do agree that, Michigan, I think, is playing outstanding football right now. Shea Patterson's playing the best football of his career. They're running the ball. The offensive line's got things in sync. Obviously, the defense has been pretty good all year, except that Wisconsin game. But yeah, it's going to take a lot, I think, for them to win Saturday because of what you alluded to. I mean, 3 turnovers, a 17-point swing against a top 10 Penn State team, and Ohio State still won by double digits and was in control for, 53 of the 60 minutes. So it just kind of speaks to how dominant they've been all season and just how, talented they are, how athletic they are at pretty much every position across the board.
And another one of those things that show how maybe this rivalry has evolved is there's a healthy segment of the Ohio State fan base that would rather lose to Michigan and win a national championship than beat Michigan and not win a national championship, which is totally different than where we were 50 years ago. Bo and Woody totally emphasized winning the game. In fact, bowl games were secondary to those guys, and that also speaks to a bigger picture about how bowl games were truly exhibitions up until the early 2000s. Statistics in bowl games weren't counted as part of the official NCAA statistics, but that's one of the ways this rivalry has changed.
Yeah, I mean, so much of that poll, 41% said they'd rather beat Michigan and lose in the national championship game than win the national title and lose to Michigan. It's always hard to get that phrase right. I honestly am not that surprised by it, just because when I'm born and raised in Ohio and I've been around Ohio State forever, so I know how much these people care about this game and how much it influences their happiness for a year. But it is still surprising, though, when you see it, written down and everything. And I don't know. I mean, there's definitely an obsession. I don't think it's an unhealthy obsession. I think it's good to always be curious about your rival. The TV ratings in Columbus for Michigan games are always just through the roof. But it's just yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty mind-boggling thing when you think that many people would rather beat Michigan than win a national title. But like you said, I think there's a generational divide. I mean, more young people definitely said they'd rather win the national championship, and it was the older crowd that would rather beat Michigan. And it's because of, I don't know, I guess a lifetime of that being so important to them. But also, like you said, bowl games just used to have a different feel.
Right.
You know, pre-BCS, the goal was, beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, go to the Rose Bowl. It wasn't, national championship or bust. But the BCS and now the playoff have really just changed how fans consume college football and what the goals of each individual team is.
Both Ohio State and Michigan are playing it very conservatively leading up to this game. Everybody's talking about how they respect each other. Part of that respect goes back to the coaching staffs. Now, there's going to be a lot said about Greg Madison and Al Washington going from Michigan to Ohio State, but another interesting subtext is the fact that Ryan Day and Don Brown have a long history working together.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting. I mean, for 2 years, Boston College had Ryan Day as their offensive coordinator and Don Brown as their defensive coordinator. It's just mind-boggling. Great hiring by Steve Adazio. Obviously had an eye for talent. Boston College was a combined 14-12 in those years. They did 5 losses by 4 points or less, though. So they were a good team, and they were kind of coming around, and they've been great since those guys left. But I mean, they know each other well. I would say that they are friendly. Don Brown coached Ryan Day's brother. So, I mean, there's a long-standing relationship. These are 2 Northeast guys. All these Northeast people seem like they know each other, especially in college football because it's not a huge thing up there, so they kind of bond over all of that. So that's been the matchup in this game. This will be the 3rd year. Ryan Day's offense against Don Brown's defense. Ryan Day's had a lot of success so far. Last year was obviously the year that really piqued everyone's interest. So yeah, I think that's just always going to be a subplot here in this game as long as those guys are at Ohio State and Michigan.
Now, another subplot that will have, I think, more of an impact on the field is the fact that Michigan's offensive line, coached by Ed Warner, former Ohio State offensive line coach, former Buckeye offensive coordinator, he's in his 2nd year in Ann Arbor. Ed Warner's offensive lines generally get better as the season goes on. But then you got Chase Young going up against that offensive line on Saturday.
And that has been the case again this year. Michigan's offensive line was lost early in the year. Everyone remembers the Wisconsin game. I was very surprised by that just because they were good last year and have pretty much everyone back. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me why they struggled so much. But they've played really, really well this last month, 6 weeks, ever since the second half of that Penn State game. And they've got a whole different animal on Saturday, as you alluded to. I mean, Chase Young, I think, is clearly the most dominant player in college football and probably the best. Doesn't mean he's going to win the Heisman, but he's really, really good. He's been unblockable. I mean, I don't think there's anything Michigan can do to neutralize him. He's just that good. You're just going to have to deal with what he's able to get. You just hope it's not, it's 1 sack instead of 3 sacks or whatever. The rest of the defensive line, there's good players on Michigan's O-line. I think that they can, have success running the football a little bit, but throwing, I think, will be a major issue, and that's their avenue to win. I mean, Shea Patterson's been playing great lately. He needs to have a really, really good game for Michigan to have a chance, and I just don't see him having a whole lot of time with Chase Young running after him.
Well, and the forecast for Saturday is calling for potentially some nasty weather. We were looking at maybe rain, sleet, snow mix. Michigan's got some experience playing in heavy rain, that Notre Dame game. Ohio State's played in some games that haven't been the best climates. But if you're in a heavy rain game, a snow, sleet type game, passing the ball becomes more difficult. We saw Michigan run the ball very effectively against Notre Dame, but the last couple of weeks that rushing attack hasn't been there, hasn't needed to be there because Michigan's been so good throwing the ball. But if this comes down to a rushing game, does the advantage go to J.K. Dobbins and Ohio State?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Ohio State has the better D-line, the better O-line, the better running back. So that's kind of a problem for Michigan. It could develop into a blowout if the weather is bad, if we have a snowball 2.0. I just don't think – I think it will be a dogfight, just for the record. But if it becomes a weather game and this is a run fest, I know Michigan was good against Notre Dame, but Ohio State's way better than Notre Dame. And it would portend some problems, I think, for Michigan if they get into that type of game. Ohio State's way more physical. They're better. They're tougher. I don't think that's what Michigan wants. They want blue skies and Shea Patterson able to throw the ball along with the snow and rain, 20-mile-an-hour winds too, which is obviously too difficult to throw the ball.
If there's been a knock on Justin Fields, it's been he takes too long in the pocket. He's susceptible to taking sacks, and certainly the last couple of weeks we've seen fumbles become an issue for Justin Fields. Now, not turning the ball over has been the key to Michigan's turnaround this year. Has Ohio State's decline the last couple of weeks been putting the ball on the turf?
For sure. I think if anything is stock down for Ohio State, it is the turnovers, taking care of the football. I don't think it was because of the weather last week. I just think that was kind of a coincidence that there was some rain in the second half, and then Justin Fields and J.K. Dobbins fumbled. But certainly, I mean, it makes you wonder. And then when you see the weather forecast, it's like, that could be a problem for Ohio State. If Ohio State has 0 turnovers against Michigan, I think there's 0 chance they lose.
All right, we'll leave on this. Since all the players were asked a form of this question, I'll ask you your earliest, most distinct memory of the game.
That's a good question. So I was born in 1987. My actual first memory of Ohio State-Michigan is not a football game. It's the famous basketball game, the Southeast Regional Final in 1992 when the Fab Five won against Jim Jackson. I mean, I guess my first football memory is probably the 94 game when Ohio State finally won and John Cooper basically saved his job that day. So yeah, I'd have to go with 94.
I think I've shared this before. In 82, when I was 6.5 years old, I went to the game. Don't remember a whole lot about the game itself, but what I do remember distinctly is after the game, we went out to eat at a restaurant in Columbus. We walked in, and at the entry of the restaurant where they had the chalkboard with the day specials, they had the score of the game. Ohio State had won that game. And as a 6.5-year-old, I thought, okay, this is pretty big. They're writing this on chalkboards at restaurants. So Ohio State, Michigan, once again, they will renew the rivalry, and I'll let you go out on this because you pointed this out on Twitter earlier on Tuesday. If Ohio State wins, Michigan loses, that's got some historic ramifications.
Yes, not just annual bragging rights on the line, but I don't know, forever bragging rights, I guess you could say. Ohio State would become the all-time leader in college football history in win percentage.
So there you have it. The Buckeyes can become at #1 all-time with a win on Saturday. I want to thank Rowland from The Blade for joining us this week on College Football Weekly.
Thank you.